Opening with the king's pawn controls the center and opens up the light-squared bishop and queen. Often, e5 is a common response that establishes a presence in the center, controls d4, and opens up the queen and dark-squared bishop. Knight f3 develops the knight toward the center, attacks the e5 pawn, and knight c6 develops the knight toward the center. In the Scotch game, d4 gains space in the center, and he takes d4, opens up the center, and his bishop c4 develops the bishop to an active square. Bishop c5 develops the bishop toward the center. c3 attacks the d4 pawn and offers a gambit pawn. The best option was to develop a knight off its... The bishop was sacrificed. A stunning move. This is a clear recapture. This is the only move that works. This activates a queen by developing it off of its starting. This evades the check from the queen. Right on target. This steps away from the checking queen. That bishop was free for the taking. Playing the same piece again slows down the progress in the opening. This is not the right idea. This overlooks a better way to block an attack on a vulnerable pawn. Castling kingside tends to be safer than queenside because this prepares the bishop for development. This defends a vulnerable pawn by pinning one of its attackers. The better move was to develop a bishop off its starting square. The game is still close to equal, but white lost their advantage. Out comes the rook and into the battle. White had an advantage, but now the game is close to equal. This removes the attacking pawn. This maintains the balance in material with a good trade. This is an equal trade. A straightforward recapture. This kicks a bishop. This wins a pawn. With this recapture, black introduces a new piece to the game. That was a free pawn. This evades the check from the... This gives away a free pawn. That pawn was free for the taking. Very precise. The rooks can see each other now. The best option was to capture a pawn, and this threatens to capture a knight and win material after the follow. This is the only good move. The knight is now adequately defended. This threatens to tactically win a knight. This stops the opponent from being able to tactically win a knight. This leads to losing a pawn. This wins a pawn. That's fine. The piece finds a new active square. That's not a mistake, but it's not. This threatens to force eventual checkmate. This protects the attacked pawn. This is the way to win a pawn. This move puts the bishop on a safer square. This wins a pawn. A clear recapture. That was a free pawn. This move puts the rook on a safer square. This is the strongest option. This leads to losing a rook. The best option was to tactically win a rook. The better move was to double rooks on a single file. That pawn was free for the taking. This steps away from the checking rook. That was a free pawn. This moves the rook to safety. This move puts the rook on a safer square. This allows the opponent to eventually win material. This is a fair move. This steps away from the checking queen. This blocks an attack on a pawn. This moves the queen to safety. This is the way to win a pawn. This evades the check from the queen. A very strong play. That's fine. That's not a mistake, but it's not. This steps away from the checking queen. This pins a queen to the king. This blocks an attack on a queen. This is a fair move. This evades the check from the queen. That's fine. The better move was to block a check from the... Right on target. This steps away from the check. After all captures, this is an equal trade. Recaptures. This attacks a rook, winning a tempo when it moves away. This defends a rook that was under attack and had no... This threatens to force eventual checkmate. The correct move to safety. This evades the check from the rook. This offers to exchange pieces of equal value. This is the only move that works. This may clear recapture. Very precise. This activates the king in the endgame. The better move was to push a passed pawn. This is the strongest option. The passed pawn moves towards its goal. One of the best moves. Pushing a passed pawn. A solid choice. This evades the check from the rook. A very strong play. One of the best moves. Right on target. A solid choice. A very strong play. One of the best moves. This steps away from the checking. A solid choice. A very strong play. Pushing a passed pawn. One of the best moves. This steps away from the checking rook. A solid choice. This blocks the check from an opposing. This moves the rook to safety. The passed pawn moves towards its goal. A very strong play. This steps away from the checking rook. One of the best moves. The passed pawn moves towards its goal. A solid choice. A very strong play. Very precise. This blocks the check from... This move puts the rook on a... The passed pawn moves towards it. This steps away from the checking. One of the best moves. This evades the check from the rook, pushing a passed pawn. There were worse moves, but also something much... This steps away from the check. This continues the checkmate threat. This allows the opponent to... The best option was to checkmate the king. Right on target. This continues down the road to check. This evades the check from the... This is still on the road to checkmate. Very precise. This wins material. This is the only good move. This is the strongest option. This is the only move that works. Right on target. This is the only good move. Very precise. There was only one good move there, and white... This is the only good move. This permits the opponent to capturing while sacrificing the rook was the right idea. This steps away from the check. The rook was sacrificed, a brilliant move. This steps away from the checking. Sacrificing the rook was the right idea. This steps away from the checking rook. The rook was sacrificed, a brilliant move. This steps away from the checking rook. There was only one good move there. This overlooks a better way to evade the check from the opponent. This is the only move that works. This steps away from the checking rook. This is the strongest option. This steps away from the... Right on target. This evades the check from... Very precise. This steps away from the checking. Sacrificing the rook was the right idea. This evades the check from the rook. The rook was sacrificed, a brilliant move. This steps away from the checking rook. That's not a mistake, but it's not the best move either. This steps away from the checking rook. Sacrificing the rook was the right idea. This evades the check from the rook. The rook was sacrificed, a brilliant... This steps away... Sacrificing the rook was the right idea. This steps away from the... The rook was sacrificed, a brilliant move. This evades the check from the rook. A solid choice. This evades the check from the rook. This is the only good move. This steps away from the checking. This is the strongest option. This steps away from the checking. Sacrificing the rook was the right idea. This evades the check from... Right on target. This steps away from the checking rook. The rook was sacrificed. This evade... Very precise. This is the strongest option. This step... Right on target. This steps... Very precise. This evades the check from... A very strong... This steps away... One of the best moves. This evades the... This is the strongest option. This evades... Right on... This evade... Sacrificing the rook. This evade... Very precise. This step... A solid choice. This evade... The rook was sacrificed. This evades the check from the... Sacrificing the rook was the right... This step... A very strong play. This step... The rook was... This evade... Sacrificing the rook. This evade... The rook was This evades the... The game ended in a draw by repetition.